Investigators found actor and filmmaker Rob Reiner and his wife murdered.
Nick Reiner is being held on $4 million bond.
These charges will be 2 counts of first-degree murder.
Where'd you get this weed?
I think we just overreacted. Big matter.
For most people, Nick Reiner's story begins with the headlines, but there's a deeper story most haven't stopped to examine. Just some background on this case: the bodies of Rob and Michelle were discovered the next day after the murder by their daughter Romy, who called 911 and allegedly immediately pointed to Nick, saying that he was potentially dangerous. This, combined with the infamous story of the blowout fight at Conan O'Brien's Christmas party, along with an already public history of conflict and addiction, and later reports of conservatorship and schizophrenia, it's easy to see why police moved quickly and why much of the internet immediately assumed guilt. So rather than pretend like I know what happened that night or look at the case itself, I want to look more at the broader issues surrounding Nick, because the more I looked into it, the more this story began to feel like something else entirely. Part of what made this case so shocking was that Rob Reiner, at least publicly, seemed like the last person you would imagine becoming the victim of something as violent and tragic. Despite spending his entire life in Hollywood, Rob had cultivated an image that felt unusually grounded and wholesome for someone of that world. Many of his films carry that same warmth. Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally. They're emotionally sincere movies. His father, Carl Reiner, was one of the defining comedy figures of the 20th century, best known as the creator of The Dick Van Dyke Show. By many accounts, Rob desperately sought approval from his father, perhaps wanting a warmer, more traditional father-son relationship than the one they naturally had. Rob was married to Penny Marshall during the 1970s before meeting Michelle Singer on the set of When Harry Met Sally. They briefly dated before eloping in Hawaii in 1989. In 1991, Rob and Michelle moved to the Brentwood neighborhood after purchasing a home from Norman Lear, so he was in effect kind of buying his dream home. Together, Rob and Michelle would have 3 kids, Jake, Nick, and Romy. From the outside, it looked like an idyllic Hollywood upbringing, but scattered stories around Nick's childhood paint a darker picture. Various accounts describe him as emotionally volatile from a young age, prone to tantrums, angry outbursts, and periods where he seemed difficult to calm down. Media outlets everywhere describe him as a typical spoiled Hollywood brat.
Our main investor, he's the father of Lewis, our best production assistant.
Fuck you, Dad. Give me some money.
That's my boy.
I tried to look into the parenting style of Rob and Michelle Reiner. I found a number of references to a more permissive household.
I would say, certain issues with the kids. I mean, that, we have different ways of going about it. I mean, we're on the same page a lot of times, but a lot of times we have different approaches. And that can be a source of,
A discipline approach.
discipline and, those kind of things.
I'll give you the perfect example.
I'm like the grandfather.
It's like when the boys were little, they were like, I don't know, 4 and 6 before our daughter was born. And I said, we really need to teach them how to make a bed. And our oldest son, Jake, goes, but Daddy, you don't make your bed. And Rob went, he's right. All right, that's it. We don't have to. Yeah, that's the discipline history of this household.
Right.
And even the kids complain that there aren't enough boundaries and that they weren't disciplined enough.
And that's something that I got from my parents.
While none of this is a smoking gun, in general, when children struggle with emotional regulation or oppositional behavior, a lack of structure and boundaries can sometimes make those issues worse over time. At one point, the Reiners hired a yoga instructor to work with the kids, particularly Nick. The yoga instructor would write a 2005 children's book called Share in the Air, inspired by those sessions. The story centers around a young boy struggling to control his anger after breaking his mother's vase. After being admonished, the boy runs off alone into the woods where he encounters a yogi who teaches him breathing techniques. On the surface, it's just a children's story about mindfulness and calming down. But looking back now, people have inevitably revisited it as something more revealing, an oddly intimate glimpse into the emotional atmosphere surrounding Nick's childhood years. In 1997, Rob Reiner appeared on Larry King while promoting I Am Your Child, a program focused on encouraging parents to talk to and read to young children. At the time, Rob had almost positioned himself as a kind of public advocate for modern fatherhood. Thoughtful, emotionally engaged, the opposite of the distant Hollywood dad stereotype.
Two kids? Tell us about the kids.
It's very good. I got two little boys. Jake, who is he's almost 6 years old. He'll be 6 in May.
Named him Jake?
Yes, his name is Jake, and his little brother Nick is 3.5. Jake and Nick, as Mel Brooks said, you got a detective agency. Jake and Nick Reiner.
Why would a Jewish father name someone Nick?
Because I don't know. I mean,
Is it
we
Nick
like
or
the name.
Nicholas?
No, it's Nick. There's no Nicholas, and it's Jake. There's no Jacob. It's Nick and Jake. That's it.
All right. And they like their names?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, there's a senator and a bank robber, basically.
Okay.
Now, on one hand, it's just a dad making an offhand joke about his kids, and 3-year-olds tend to throw tantrums. But watching it now, it really lands differently, because Jake really did grow up to be this buttoned-up, successful son, and Nick was the one they were always trying to save from addiction and self-destruction. And once families unconsciously lock children into those identities, it can become very hard to escape. By Nick's own account, his issues with drugs started young, as a teen or even a preteen. He would attend treatment for the first time around age 14 and would not leave this program for almost 5 months. He would attend 17 more programs over the next 4 years, severely disrupting his home life, education, taking him out of the general public. Spending most of his adolescence cycling through treatment facilities instead of going to school and developing normal peer relationships probably created a kind of arrested development in Nick. Nick would also attend programs like Second Nature, geared for troubled teens. Programs like these were often marketed to wealthy or desperate parents as intensive interventions for defiant and unruly teenagers. The philosophy was usually built around strict structure and isolation from normal life. Teens would live off canned and frozen foods, be subjected to freezing temperatures, and some would describe not having access to sanitary places to clean themselves. Over the last decade, former attendees of these programs have increasingly come forward, claiming that some of these environments were psychologically harmful or even actively traumatic. It's worth noting that he would be sent to these places not for drugs, but to correct unruly behavior. What's my own gut feeling that there's a link between Nick's behavior and possibly something like ODD? And ODD has a strong overlap between other conditions like ADHD, autism, attachment issues. Again, you can't diagnose someone from the outside, but it's very possible that he had some kind of disorder like this and went completely unnoticed in the 1990s. As there really were no early intervention or screening tools for these kinds of conditions in the 1990s, it's possible the relationship between Rob and Nick gradually became trapped in a deeply oppositional cycle over the years. Nick already seemed emotionally reactive and difficult to regulate as a child, while Rob, despite projecting a warm, progressive public image, may have increasingly felt pressure to control his son's behavior, as it threatened both the stability of the family and the image he had built around fatherhood itself. Rob had publicly positioned himself for years as a thoughtful and emotionally engaged parent, so when Nick's behavior became more chaotic, volatile, and embarrassing, it's not hard to imagine fear and desperation slowly replacing patience. And once a parent-child relationship becomes organized around constant intervention, both sides can start reinforcing the worst parts of each other. The more the adults try to control the child, the more oppositional the child becomes.
He's rebellious and, tough-minded kid. He just got angrier and angrier, and he just rebelled more and more. So every time he'd come out of a rehab program, he'd just say, okay, well, if this is what you think about me, I'm going to go do this. And he would go do something else, and then we just started the process all over again.
Nick's issues would largely be kept a secret from the public until Rob and Nick began promoting the film Being Charlie in 2015. Being Charlie was a movie widely framed as a hopeful story about surviving addiction and emerging from darkness. The story is that Charlie is the son of a famous Hollywood actor who's running for governor, while Charlie himself has already spent years spiraling through addiction. Nick started working on the script while still attending treatment. It opens with a somber, awkward family birthday gathering where Charlie seems emotionally checked out and almost irritated by the effort everyone is making around him. So even though this screenplay was probably written around 2013, 2014, Charlie almost embodies what people now call the Gen Z stare, this detached and hedonic personality where he doesn't seem angry in a dramatic sense so much as fundamentally unconvinced that life holds anything hopeful for him. A lot of the dialogue feels really sophomoric and awkward in that very specific early 20s guy kind of way, which makes sense because it was written by guys who were 20 and 21. And honestly, it feels less like they were trying to make a commercially viable film and more like a controlled creative outlet for Nick. Almost like a film school style project designed to keep him occupied and hopefully pull him deeper into the film business. The problem is that this movie did Nick no favors and was mercilessly panned. It's a really hard movie to watch because it contains two completely different sensibilities that are fighting each other the entire time. In a way, it feels like Rob and Nick were trying to tell two very different stories through the same film. My guess is that Rob wanted to do a more hopeful, typical recovery arc type film that audiences could connect with, and Nick was not having it. Nick wanted to do something dark and something that would just shit on the treatment industry as a whole. The result is that it never becomes either person's film. It ends up feeling very emotionally detached. Nick and Rob would often talk about how they would get into fights over the production on the set in front of the entire crew. It may seem kind of weird to use something that's very personal and painful for a semi-training exercise, but that kind of thing is actually very common in film school environments. Film students will be constantly mining deeply private, maybe even inappropriate things for material. That's because they're young kids and they're trying to figure out who they are artistically as well as who they are as people. A lot of critics lambasted the movie for how unlikable the characters were. None of the characters are very sympathetic. No one is really sympathetic to someone born of privilege, for one. But also, they really are just not very likable people. They're cold, cynical. But also, there is no real arc to Charlie's character. He starts out reckless and selfish and remains that way through the entire film. Early on, he hitchhikes with an impoverished family and then casually steals from them. He breaks a church window seemingly just to create chaos. Everywhere he goes, he seems to delight in becoming a burden or problem for other people. It might have provided more emotional understanding if they included how Charlie first became addicted to drugs. Nick and Rob would also dodge the topic, but they would discuss his first time entering treatment.
Well, he was with a friend one night, and the friend of his overdosed and had to go to the hospital. And it was at that point that we were concerned, that Nick was also, using the way this young guy was. And to be completely honest with you, I think his mother and I overreacted at that point because we got scared. We saw this other kid overdosing and possibly dying.
And he got sent to this place called Visions. Yeah. And to make a long story short,
they sent you there.
I got tricked into getting
Was he
sent
there when you went there?
There was two different facilities. We both got sent there. Yeah. And my roommate was a heroin addict. So before I even went to rehab, I'd never sniffed coke. I'd only smoked pot. I'd taken ecstasy.
Listening to Nick talk about rehab, I get the sense that it didn't push him towards recovery as much as it pushed him towards identifying with addiction and alienation, which is why both Charlie and Nick seem to have little interest in sobriety. Even during the press tour, Nick would sometimes appear out of it.
Drugs are only a symptom.
Yeah,
it is true.
It is true.
It's a tiny part of the whole problem.
What is the whole problem?
It's different for everyone. I mean, I know I got problems. Everyone else got some problems, They deal with it however they deal with it. The drugs or the gambling or, whatever you do.
From 2016 to 2018, Nick appeared on the podcast Dopey, a show the producers describe as a show about drugs, addiction, and dumb shit. Some of the stories Nick told involved breaking a church window connected to a treatment facility, hoping he would get kicked out so that he would be prescribed Wellbutrin, which I'm not really sure how that works, but that was what he said. Nick would tell several other stories centered around his drug use. What's worth noting isn't just the severity of the behavior, but how casually he describes it.
So Nick shot Wellbutrin.
I did one time. It was
For the Dopey Nation, Wellbutrin is a
antidepressant with a little bit of hop to it.
Yeah, dopaminergic. People would sniff it in jail. Very low abuse potential, but a tiny smidgen of abuse capability.
I won't go into the gritty details, but I befriended a homeless man in Maine, and he turned me on to the idea. And we went.
Was that where you shot coke in the McDonald's?
No, you were shooting all sorts of weird shit.
I know, I was shooting weird shit in Maine.
On his first appearance, Nick seems genuinely engaged and enthusiastic about appearing. And then as time goes on, the appearances sound a lot harder to listen to. Nick sounds more intoxicated, less cohesive. Dave would often try to insert his dad into the conversation, and at one point asked Nick if he could give his dad some dopey swag. And then apparently he even asked Nick if he could get his dad to come on the show, and after that, Nick ghosted him. And I think that tension points to something that Nick and Rob talked a lot about on the Being Charlie press tour, the shadow aspect. Because even on a podcast about addiction and recovery, they just want access to his dad. Dave initially seemed to connect with Nick as a person. They sound genuinely friendly at times. But over time, Dave also started trying to access the larger orbit around Nick.
Did you read the script?
I'll never do that.
Well, why did I send it to you if you're not going to give it to him?
I don't know. You're like harping on the fact that it was $30 and that you sent me this package, and I'm not going to give it to him.
Did you open the package?
No, it's sitting in my room, and it's this depressing fucking brown bag with these dumb Oy vey hats. I think everybody in the Dopey Nation will understand that I'm not going to give my dad the Oy vey hats. They'll get it.
I don't think so. I think it's a disappointment to me and to the Dopey Nation and to
You'll be happy that I'm not smoking weed, and that's about it.
All right, well, I think your dad would really like it.
And whether intentional or not, you can imagine how that might reinforce a lifelong insecurity Nick probably already carried. The people were never fully interested in him without the gravitational pull of his father. And during the Being Charlie press tour, you can almost watch that pressure playing out in real time. Nick would often talk about wanting to carve out a separate bad boy identity for himself, which is a common identity choice for kids from affluent, highly managed households.
It was very, I had no identity and I had no passions. And I think the reason I had no identity was because, I have a famous dad and a famous grandpa, and they sort of, that fame sort of informs who you are. So I wanted to etch out my own identity with a more rebellious, angry, drug addicted sort of persona.
That identity choice probably has less to do with image than escaping the expectations of living up to the Reiner name and morally righteous reputation set forth by his dad. There are several moments on the Being Charlie press tour where you can see Nick struggle to sort of play the game. And while he's not naturally a comfortable speaker, unlike his father who spent decades doing polished interviews, Nick often seems nervous, stiff, uncertain. There's a visible self-consciousness, like someone trying to carefully navigate every sentence while also managing the anxiety underneath it. And it's painfully obvious that there is a lot of media coaching involved with these appearances. The most obvious aspect is the Castle Rock jacket that Nick wears. The effect is that he's not appearing or looking like an independent writer promoting himself, promoting his work. He just looks like an extension of the family brand. And this is obviously speculative, but it feels like Nick wanted people to look past both his behavior and his last name to see him as a person underneath the addiction and the Hollywood baggage. But the problem is, he's kind of a dick who pushes people away. And so at the same time, the uncomfortable reality may have been that people only became interested in him because of that last name and not so much his personality. Without being the son of Rob Reiner, he likely never gets a semi-autobiographical film made about him or invited onto podcasts like Howard Stern and On Point. But there's also kind of a dark side to that visibility. Nepo babies are often viewed through a much harsher lens than the general public. If someone from a less privileged background falls into addiction, it's framed as tragic and understandable. Whereas someone from a Nepo baby or more privileged background, that kind of thing would be viewed as weak or moral failure. I think it's important to note that Nick grew up inside an ecosystem of celebrity children who were all navigating the same pressures of legacy and nepotism. He grew up with people like Tallulah Willis, Patrick Schwarzenegger, Lewis Pullman. They all came from similarly high-profile Hollywood families. And in recent years, many of his peers seem to have successfully crossed the bridge into adulthood and professional legitimacy. Patrick Schwarzenegger suddenly breaks through on The White Lotus. Lewis Pullman starts appearing in increasingly major projects, becoming viewed as a genuinely respected actor rather than just Bill Pullman's son. Meanwhile, publicly at least, Nick appears to have drifted further and further out of functional life. And psychologically, I imagine that comparison could become incredibly painful. Because one of the hardest experiences for people with arrested development or chronic addiction is watching time continue moving forward for everyone else while internally feeling frozen. And in Hollywood especially, that kind of success is very visible. If someone you grew up with lands a major breakout role, everyone sees it. People in your house, your family talk about it. You see it on your social media. It's everywhere. And because Nick's environment probably trained him from childhood to think in terms of creative achievement, it's not hard to imagine feelings of humiliation or inadequacy intensifying over time. And that's not to say that success guarantees happiness. Obviously, it doesn't. But Nick seemed to occupy this strange middle ground where he was close enough to success to witness it in his family and all around him and watch people celebrate their success. But he himself was becoming increasingly less able to participate in it. And it's not to say that the Reiners were uncaring, as they expended great resources to try and get Nick back on the right track, reportedly spending up to $70,000 a month at certain facilities. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of this entire story. The sense that despite the enormous amount of resources surrounding Nick Reiner, it still felt like a very long unraveling that nobody knew how to stop. Part of why I wanted to do this video is I couldn't stop thinking how Nick's mind may simply not have been well suited for the environment he grew up in. A household with relatively loose boundaries emotionally, but enormous unspoken expectations socially. Hollywood is an industry built on performance and charisma, and Nick increasingly comes across as someone who struggled to assimilate naturally into those systems. And I think being Charlie may have been partly Rob's way of trying to repair some of that damage, but the film never really launched Nick's career. So instead of feeling like a turning point, it just feels like a temporary pause in a long line of deterioration. This is a very tragic and still ongoing case, and maybe new details will bring more insight. Until then, I would love to hear what some of your thoughts are. Thanks for watching.